The good news is that there are proven strategies and techniques you can use to break this translation habit and start thinking more intuitively in your target language. Over the course of this discussion, we'll explore 15 powerful tips that can help rewire your brain and develop a more direct, fluent relationship with the language you're learning. From identifying everyday objects in your target language to actively incorporating it into your daily routines, we'll cover a comprehensive set of approaches designed to shift your mindset and boost your fluency. We'll also discuss the importance of embracing mistakes, leveraging technology, and cultivating a growth-oriented mindset, all of which are crucial for overcoming the translation hurdle. So whether you're a beginner just starting out on your language learning journey, or an experienced student looking to take your skills to the next level, the insights and strategies we'll explore today can help you break free from the translation trap and unlock a new level of fluency and confidence. Let's dive in. Tip 1. Identify objects around you in your target language. One of the most fundamental steps in breaking the translation habit is to start associating the objects and items in your everyday life with their proper names in your target language. This seems like a simple exercise, but it can have a profound impact on how your brain processes the new language. The key is to consciously make the effort to think of the words in your target language, rather than automatically translating from your native tongue. For example, instead of looking at a table and thinking mesa in Spanish, you want to train your brain to immediately think mesa when you see the object. Start with the obvious things around you: furniture, electronics, office supplies, etc., as these are the easiest to practice with. As you get more comfortable, challenge yourself to expand your vocabulary by naming the clothes you're wearing, the food you're eating, or even the weather outside. The more you repeat this process, the more natural it will become. Your brain will start making those direct connections between the physical world and the words in your new language. This lays the groundwork for thinking in your target language, rather than constantly translating. It's a simple but powerful exercise that you can do anywhere, at any time. Keeping a small vocabulary journal can also help reinforce the connections. The key is to be consistent and make it a daily habit. Over time, you'll start to notice a real difference in how easily the words come to you. Tip 2. Repeat phrases you hear from native speakers. Another highly effective strategy for breaking the translation habit is to actively repeat phrases and expressions that you hear from native speakers. This does more than just improve your pronunciation, it also helps train your brain to process the language in a more natural, intuitive way. When you're listening to media in your target language, whether it's a TV show, a podcast, or a language learning video, pay close attention to the way the words are put together. Don't just passively listen, actively repeat the phrases you find interesting or challenging. This repetition serves several important purposes. It helps train your mouth and ears to work together more seamlessly. The more you practice saying the words out loud, the more comfortable and natural they'll feel. It gives you a better sense of how native speakers actually construct their sentences in real-life conversations. The way we learn vocabulary in textbooks or language apps doesn't always match up with how it's used in the real world. It reinforces the connections between the sounds, the spellings, and the meanings of the words. This multisensory reinforcement helps cement the language in your memory. You can take this exercise a step further by trying to mimic not just the words, but the intonation, rhythm, and body language of the native speakers as well. This will make your speech sound more natural and authentic. Start with short, simple phrases and gradually work your way up to longer, more complex expressions. Over time, you'll start to recognize common patterns and idioms that will make it easier to communicate fluidly in your target language. The key is to make this a consistent habit. Set aside time each day to actively listen and repeat, even if it's just for 10 to 15 minutes. The more you practice, the more natural and intuitive the language will become. Tip 3. Create situations where you have no choice but to use your target language. One of the most effective ways to break the translation habit is to put yourself in situations where you have no choice but to use your target language. This can be challenging, especially if you don't have easy access to full language immersion environments. However, you can still find ways to create your own mini-immersion experiences that force your brain to engage directly with the language, without the safety net of your native tongue. One approach is to designate certain spaces or times as target language only zones. This could be a specific room in your house, or a certain block of time each day where you commit to thinking, speaking, and even doing routine tasks entirely in your new language. Another option is to seek out language exchange partners, either in person or online. These are individuals who are also learning your target language, and you can practice conversing with each other. The back-and-forth nature of these exchanges makes it much harder to rely on translation. You can also try joining local language meetup groups or taking classes where the instruction is solely in your target language. Being surrounded by other learners, as well as native speakers, creates an environment that encourages you to use the language actively. The key is to push yourself outside of your comfort zone and find ways to make the target language the default, rather than the exception. It may feel awkward or frustrating at first, but those are the growing pains that will ultimately lead to faster progress. Remember, the goal is to train your brain to stop automatically translating and to start thinking in your new language. The more you can immerse yourself in real-world situations that require you to do that, the quicker you'll start to see results. Of course, it's important to be patient with yourself and not get discouraged. Breaking the translation habit takes time and consistent practice. But with the right mindset and strategies, you can absolutely retrain your brain to become more fluent and confident in your target language. Tip 4. Watch TV and movies without subtitles. While subtitles can be a helpful crutch when you're first starting to learn a new language, they can also become a hindrance to your progress in the long run. Watching media without the written translation forces your brain to focus solely on processing the spoken language, which is a crucial step in breaking the translation habit. When you rely on subtitles, your brain tends to split its attention between reading the text and listening to the audio. This can prevent you from fully engaging with the natural flow and rhythm of the language. Over time, it can also make you overly dependent on having that written support. By removing the subtitles, you're compelled to tune in more closely to the dialogue, the intonation, and the context clues that native speakers use. This helps train your ear to better recognize the sounds, patterns, and cadence of the language. At first, this approach may feel incredibly challenging, as you'll likely miss a significant amount of the meaning and nuance. Don't get discouraged, this is a normal part of the learning process. The more you expose yourself to the language without the aid of written translations, the more your brain will start to adapt and pick up on those subtle cues. You can start by watching content that's geared towards language learners, where the vocabulary and speaking pace is a bit slower and simpler. As you gain more confidence, gradually increase the difficulty by watching shows or movies intended for native speakers. Another helpful tip is to use closed captions in the target language, rather than your native language. This provides a visual cue to reinforce what you're hearing, without giving you the full translation. It's a middle ground that can ease you into the process. The key is to stick with it and not give in to the temptation of turning the subtitles back on. Over time, you'll start to notice your comprehension improving, and you'll begin to think in the target language instead of constantly translating. Tip 5. Avoid using a dictionary during lessons or conversations. It's so easy to fall into the trap of constantly reaching for a dictionary or translation app when you encounter an unfamiliar word or phrase. However, this habit can seriously disrupt the flow of your learning and prevent you from truly engaging with the language. When you interrupt a conversation or a lesson to look up a word, it breaks the continuity and often causes you to lose the thread of what's being discussed. This can make it much harder to regain your footing and continue the dialogue in a natural way. Instead of relying on the dictionary crutch, try to find creative ways to express what you're trying to say, even if you don't know the exact word. Use gestures, describe the concept, or ask your conversation partner for help. This not only keeps the dialogue moving, but it also helps you develop valuable communication strategies that will serve you well in real-life interactions. Of course, there's a time and place for using a dictionary, particularly when you're studying new vocabulary or grammar concepts. But during active conversations or lessons, it's best to resist the urge to constantly look things up. The more you can train yourself to work through the language barriers without that external aid, the more fluent and confident you'll become. This strategy may feel uncomfortable or frustrating at first, but it's an important step in rewiring your brain to think in your target language. By pushing yourself to communicate without the safety net of translation, you'll start to develop a more intuitive understanding of the language and how it's used in real-world contexts. Remember, learning a new language is a journey, and overcoming the translation habit is a key milestone along the way. With patience, persistence, and a willingness to step outside your comfort zone, you can absolutely train your brain to start thinking, speaking, and even dreaming in your target language. Tip 6. Train yourself to respond quickly to common questions. One of the biggest roadblocks to fluency is the hesitation that often comes with trying to formulate a response in your target language. When someone asks you a simple question like, "How are you?" or "What did you do this weekend?" it's easy to freeze up as your brain scrambles to translate and construct an appropriate answer. To overcome this, it's important to train yourself to have a few go-to responses ready for these types of common questions and greetings. By rehearsing and practicing these stock phrases, you can start to access them more quickly and naturally, without having to pause and translate. Think about the kinds of basic questions and statements that come up frequently in everyday conversations, and start building a repertoire of responses. For example, "How are you?" "I'm doing well, thank you." "I'm good, how about you? What have you been up to?" "Not much, just the usual." "Just working and trying to stay busy." "Did you have a good weekend?" "Yes, it was great." "It was alright, how about yours?" The key is to find simple, natural-sounding phrases that you can recall easily. Don't worry about perfecting complex grammar or vocabulary, the goal is to be able to keep the conversation flowing smoothly. As you practice these stock responses, pay attention to the intonation, rhythm, and body language that native speakers use. Try to mimic these elements as closely as possible to make your own responses sound more authentic. You can practice these common phrases anywhere, while commuting, doing chores, or even just in the shower. The more you reinforce them, the more automatic they'll become, allowing you to transition between topics with ease and confidence. Remember, the goal is not to have a rigid script, but to train your brain to access the right words and expressions quickly and intuitively. With time and consistent practice, you'll start to feel less like you're translating, and more like you're simply communicating naturally in your target language. Tip 7. Study with materials that don't provide translations. While having access to translations can be helpful in the early stages of language learning, it can also become a crutch that prevents you from fully immersing yourself in the target language. To break the translation habit, it's important to seek out learning materials that present information and explanations solely in your new language. This could mean using textbooks, worksheets, or even video content that avoids providing the native language equivalent for new vocabulary and grammar concepts. Instead, the focus is on explaining things directly in the target language, forcing your brain to grapple with the material without the option of falling back on translation. At first, this approach may feel incredibly challenging and frustrating. You may find yourself constantly reaching for a dictionary or translation app to understand what's being presented. However, it's important to resist that temptation and push through the discomfort. The more you expose yourself to the target language in this direct, translation-free way, the more your brain will adapt and start to make those crucial connections without the need for an intermediary. Over time, you'll find that your comprehension and fluency start to improve at a faster rate. One helpful strategy is to start with materials that are specifically designed for language learners, where the content is pitched at an appropriate level of difficulty. As you gain more confidence, you can gradually transition to resources intended for native speakers, further immersing yourself in authentic language use. Additionally, you can look for opportunities to engage with native speakers directly, whether through language exchange partners, conversation clubs, or even just casual interactions in your community. The back and forth of real-time dialogue will force you to rely on your target language skills without the crutch of translation. Remember, the goal is to train your brain to start thinking in your new language, rather than constantly translating. By exposing yourself to target language-only materials and situations, you'll take a big step towards making that shift and developing a more natural, intuitive fluency. Tip 8. Focus on learning common phrases, not just individual words. When it comes to building vocabulary and fluency in a new language, it's important to go beyond just memorizing individual words. Focusing solely on single terms can lead to a fragmented understanding of how the language is actually used in real-world contexts. Instead, try to prioritize learning common phrases, expressions, and idiomatic usages. These multi-word units not only provide more natural-sounding ways to communicate, but they also often have nuances and connotations that can't be fully captured by simply translating the individual words. For example, instead of just learning the word crazy in your target language, look at how it's used in different expressions like crazy busy, that's crazy, or you're crazy for thinking that. This gives you a much richer and more contextual understanding of how the term is actually applied in everyday speech. Similarly, pay attention to common greetings, introductions, and small talk phrases that native speakers use. These types of formulaic expressions can be incredibly helpful for smoothing out the awkwardness of conversational pauses and maintaining the flow of a dialogue. One effective way to build this repertoire of common phrases is to keep a running list or journal of expressions you encounter in your studies or interactions. Whenever you hear a phrase that sounds particularly natural or idiomatic, make a note of it and practice incorporating it into your own speech. You can also try shadowing native speakers by repeating the phrases you hear out loud. This not only helps cement them in your memory, but it also trains your mouth and ears to get used to the rhythm and cadence of the language. Remember, language is much more than just a collection of individual vocabulary words. By focusing on learning common phrases and expressions, you'll start to develop a more authentic, nuanced understanding of how the language is actually used in real-life communication. This, in turn, will make it easier to break the translation habit and start thinking more naturally in your target language. Tip 9. Incorporate your target language into your daily activities. One of the most powerful ways to retrain your brain to think in your target language is to actively incorporate it into your everyday routines and tasks. Instead of relying on your native tongue for the mundane aspects of your day, challenge yourself to narrate your actions and thoughts in your new language. This could involve anything from cooking a meal and doing chores around the house, to running errands or commuting to work. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, make a conscious effort to describe your activities and thought processes in your target language. At first, this may feel incredibly awkward and unnatural. You may struggle to find the right words or expressions, and you may even catch yourself slipping back into your native language. But that's okay. The important thing is to keep pushing yourself to use the target language as much as possible. Over time, this practice will become easier and more automatic. Your brain will start to make stronger connections between the physical actions you're performing and the language you're using to describe them. This, in turn, will help reinforce the habit of thinking in your new language, rather than constantly translating. You can take this exercise a step further by narrating your internal thought processes as well. As you go about your day, try to silently talk to yourself in your target language, working through problems, making decisions, or simply reflecting on your experiences. Again, it may feel strange and unnatural at first, but the more you do it, the more natural it will become. You may even find that you start dreaming in your target language, which is a sure sign that your brain is making the transition. Remember, the key is to be consistent and persistent with this practice. Set aside specific times each day to immerse yourself in your new language, even if it's just for 10 to 15 minutes. The more you can integrate it into your routine, the quicker you'll start to see the benefits. Ultimately, the goal is to train your brain to automatically default to your target language, rather than constantly relying on translation. By incorporating it into your daily life in this way, you'll be taking a big step towards making that shift and developing a more natural, intuitive fluency. Tip 10. Use a learner's dictionary for new words. While we've emphasized the importance of avoiding the crutch of translation, there are still times when using a dictionary can be a helpful tool in your language learning journey. The key is to seek out resources that are specifically designed for language learners, rather than relying on standard dictionaries intended for native speakers. Learners' dictionaries typically provide simpler, more accessible definitions and explanations of words and phrases in your target language. Instead of just giving you the native language equivalent, these resources will often use simple, easy-to-understand language to describe the meaning, usage, and nuances of a term. This can be incredibly valuable when you encounter a new word or expression that you don't recognize. Rather than interrupting the flow of a conversation or lesson to look up the translation, you can refer to the learner's dictionary and get a more contextual, language-focused explanation. Over time, this approach can help train your brain to start thinking about the language in its own terms, rather than constantly translating back to your native tongue. You'll start to build a more intuitive understanding of how words and phrases are used, rather than just memorizing the direct translations. Additionally, many learners' dictionaries will include example sentences, collocations, and other usage notes that can provide valuable insights into the nuances of the language. This can be especially helpful for understanding tricky grammar points or idiomatic expressions that don't have a direct equivalent in your native language. Of course, it's still important to be judicious in your use of the dictionary, and to avoid the temptation of constantly looking up every unfamiliar word. The goal is to strike a balance, using the learner's dictionary as a supplement to your active language practice, not as a crutch. By incorporating this resource strategically, you can continue to build your vocabulary and comprehension in your target language, while also reinforcing the habit of thinking and processing the language on its own terms. It's a powerful tool in your arsenal for breaking the translation habit and developing true fluency. Tip 11. Engage in active listening exercises. In addition to the strategies we've discussed so far, one powerful technique for breaking the translation habit is to practice active listening. This involves going beyond passive hearing and truly engaging with the language you're exposed to, with the goal of comprehending the meaning and intent behind the words. When you're listening to audio or video in your target language, whether it's a podcast, a TV show, or a conversation with a native speaker, make a conscious effort to focus not just on the individual words, but on the overall context and flow of the dialogue. Pay attention to things like the speaker's tone, inflection, and body language, the conversational rhythm and pacing, the use of idioms, slang, or cultural references, the logical connections and transitions between ideas. By actively processing these elements, you'll start to develop a more holistic understanding of the language, rather than just translating each word as it comes. This, in turn, will make it easier to engage in natural, spontaneous conversations, as you'll be better equipped to anticipate and respond to the ebb and flow of the exchange. One effective active listening exercise is to try to summarize or paraphrase what you've heard, either out loud or in your head. This forces you to really digest the meaning and essence of the message, rather than simply memorizing the individual words. You can also try to identify key details, such as the main ideas, the speaker's perspective or emotional state, or any important facts or figures that were mentioned. The more you can extract from the audio beyond just the literal meaning of the words, the more you're training your brain to think in the target language. Additionally, you can incorporate physical movement or gestures into your active listening practice. For example, you could try shadowing the speaker by mimicking their body language or hand movements as you listen. This multisensory engagement can help cement the language in your memory and make it feel more embodied and natural. Remember, active listening takes time and practice to develop, but it's an incredibly valuable skill for breaking the translation habit. By training your brain to focus on the deeper meaning and context of the language, you'll be well on your way to thinking and communicating more fluently in your target language. Tip 12. Embrace the discomfort of language mistakes. One of the biggest obstacles that language learners face when trying to break the translation habit is the fear of making mistakes. It's natural to feel self-conscious or embarrassed when you stumble over words or use the wrong grammatical structure, especially when communicating with native speakers. However, it's important to recognize that making mistakes is an essential part of the language learning process. In fact, it's often through those errors that we gain the most valuable insights and opportunities for growth. When you make a mistake in your target language, try to reframe it as a learning experience, rather than a source of shame or frustration. Instead of berating yourself, take a moment to reflect on what went wrong and how you can improve next time. This might involve looking up the correct usage, practicing the problematic phrase or structure, or simply making a mental note to revisit that area of the language later on. The key is to approach mistakes with a spirit of curiosity and openness, rather than self-criticism. Additionally, try to seek out opportunities to practice your language skills in low-stakes environments, where the pressure to be perfect is reduced. This could mean joining a language exchange group, participating in online forums or chat rooms, or even just chatting with a language partner over coffee. In these more relaxed settings, you'll be able to experiment with the language, take risks, and learn from your mistakes without fear of judgment or embarrassment. Over time, this will help build your confidence and resilience, making it easier to step outside your comfort zone in higher pressure situations. Remember, fluency in a new language is a journey, not a destination. There will always be areas where you struggle or make mistakes, and that's perfectly okay. The important thing is to embrace those challenges as opportunities for growth, rather than letting them hold you back. By cultivating a mindset of openness, curiosity, and self-compassion, you'll be well on your way to breaking the translation habit and developing a more natural, intuitive fluency in your target language. Tip 13. Leverage technology to supplement your practice. In today's digital age, there is a wealth of technology-based tools and resources that can be incredibly helpful in reinforcing the habit of thinking and communicating in your target language. While these shouldn't be a substitute for active practice and immersion, they can be a valuable supplement to your language learning journey. One particularly useful tool is language learning apps, which often incorporate a variety of engaging features to help cement vocabulary, grammar, and conversational skills. Many of these apps use spaced repetition and adaptive algorithms to personalize the learning experience and maximize retention. Additionally, you can take advantage of voice-based assistants or translation apps to practice speaking and listening in your target language. These tools can provide feedback on your pronunciation, help you translate idioms or colloquial expressions, and even engage in basic conversations to help you stay immersed. For a more immersive experience, you can also explore virtual reality, VR, or augmented reality, AR, language learning platforms. These technologies allow you to step into simulated environments and interact with digital avatars, giving you a sense of being present in your target language. Beyond apps and digital tools, you can also leverage social media and online communities to connect with other language learners and native speakers. Platforms like Reddit, Discord, or language-specific forums can be great places to practice your writing skills, ask questions, and engage in discussions entirely in your target language. Just be sure to strike a balance and not let technology completely replace the critical face-to-face interactions and hands-on practice that are essential for breaking the translation habit. The goal should be to use these digital tools as supplementary resources to support and enhance your overall language learning journey. Tip 14. Cultivate a growth mindset. Ultimately, one of the most important factors in overcoming the translation habit and developing true fluency in a new language is your mindset. The way you approach the learning process, and the beliefs you hold about your own capabilities, can have a significant impact on your progress and success. A growth mindset, the belief that your abilities are not fixed, but can be developed through effort and persistence, is particularly crucial when it comes to language learning. This mindset allows you to view challenges and setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities for growth and improvement. When you approach language learning with a growth mindset, you're more likely to embrace mistakes, seek out feedback, and persist through difficulties.